I was just thinking, we've read so much about partition. We've read about the pain of partition. We've read about the politics of partition. But the mechanics of partition, like what you tried to, the whole thing of displacement and how people get resettled, okay? It's a very mechanical act. I don't know how they did it after two countries were just, riven apart like that. How the systems even came back together to even do that is something. But the fact that how much of pain and how much of bitterness, in a way, would have been created in this whole process, and how it gets, in your film, what comes through is the way it gets displaced onto paper, in a way. It's like that pain and the bitterness just gets displaced onto these pieces of paper. I know there are many things that one can speak about the film, but just to, since we're having a short conversation now, and there'll be a longer, discussion tomorrow, please everybody come back for a panel discussion on which we'll have many of the filmmakers from across South Asia also present. So just wanted to know, like, how did you come to making this film and choosing this way of looking at the partition?
So I had made a film before this called Pichla Varka, the previous page, which is on YouTube and everyone can watch it, which was about my grandmother and her group of friends who would meet to play Rummy every afternoon, and how the partition was part of all of their personal history. And I grew up in a part of Delhi which is a neighborhood that was set up after the partition for rehabilitating the refugees who had come. So these were things that I was thinking about while making the film. And while making Pichla Varka, I met Charandas uncle, who was my grandmother's friend's brother-in-law. And he had this we were just on this phone call, and Sunita auntie said that, Arey, my brother-in-law, he's 90 years old and he remembers lots of things. So I said, okay, great, let's just speak to him. And he started his sort of narrative about the partition from Master Tara Singh, who was a big leader of the Akalis. And there was a particular sequence that he narrated the story in, and that really intrigued me, because I was quite ignorant of Master Tara Singh's role at the time, and so I didn't know too much about that. So his sense of history and the way he placed himself in it very firmly was something that kept coming back to me, and I felt that, okay, I need to speak to him more. And the first time I met him for Pichla Varka, he had shown me these documents, which was the first time I encountered this whole department of custodian of evacuee property. And even just the language and the way, these categories were sort of defining and continue to define homes and people and their experiences was something that I was thinking about. And then I figured that, okay, I need to make this film. And when I finished the film, I felt that I need to do more, because there was still, I felt I couldn't include enough documents. So then I started working on this book, which is now the third sort of iteration of the work that I've been doing. But also in my personal practice, I have been looking at the idea of home, which I suppose will come up again tomorrow in the panel in relation to also other films around home. So this sort of different registers of home, which is also land, also property, and how that then brings into conversation the family, the head of the family, the legal structure, the domestic sort of environs of the home. All of that then became part of this film, and the archive for this film expanded not just from expanded from the documents to include pieces of literature which I've used. And they're in the voices of the authors, who were also partition refugees. So then that became a way to sort of layer this,
Yeah, we'll open it out for discussion, but if you can just speak a little more of this layering, because I think that is very much, that is the storytelling in the film, and the way that you manage to bring voices from across the borders also, like Diwan, Maulvi Saab, those were so beautiful, the voices from there, they're not there, but they're here. And so the whole notion of home that comes through there, So and also the different elements that you have used, you know, whether it was, I mean, when you look at those files, the sounds are like almost like the silverfish eating up the paper, you know, that's how I don't know what you meant it as, but that's how I felt. It was like the paper is just being slowly chewed up and gobbled up, you know. So like all these, and then the way, in a way, you're humanizing those documents, you know, those documents which are so clinical, you know, this thing, and then, but you are, by putting in your own words, by putting, you know, those little animated graphics, so how did you arrive at that kind of a, you know, what was behind that? I know, if you can just speak a little more about that.
See, because the documents, like Charandas uncle's daughter-in-law says, that they have no value, they are out of time as such, in the way that, you know, the function that they were supposed to serve, they don't anymore. So for me, they were actually, I was reading it as for their language, and I was always seeing them as, you know, being populated with these characters and the kind of language they're using and who are these people. So for me, it was just a kind of bringing to life that perception or that experience. Because I am not an archivist or a historian who was looking at the papers to look at history. I was there talking to uncle and have this relationship with the family and chit-chatting about this and that, and then he showed me the paper. So it was coming from that context, and hence it was always sort of, you know, tethered to his life and his experiences, which is what was reflected in the documents. And the documents actually became a way to activate some of that other experience and that feeling that I got from him, that he kept all of these documents to be able to tell his story one day, which was not just his story of, not just the story of the partition, but of rebuilding, of coming to a new country, of leaving something behind, of many of these things. So in that sense, it was just a way to kind of bring visualize some of these experiences that I'd had while engaging with the people and that place. He didn't, which is actually what's been happening since Pichla Varka, because my dadi never got to see it. She passed away before the film finished. He passed away before the film finished. And his wife very recently passed away, like 2 weeks ago. And Mrs. Sunita passed away last year. So I think in that sense, with the partition, it's like the last generation of people who experienced it firsthand, and now it's only going to be second-hand memories. We won't actually have too many people who would have seen what happened the way it happened. So as I was coming here, I was also curious that since it's my, family history and the context in which I grew up in, the partition is so much sort of there and yet not talked about. I was curious in the audience what it means to people now, like.
Basically, I am a person with visual disability, okay, so I can't see. So I had my friend who was explaining this film, like, audio describing this film. Priyanka, first of all, this is very, the way she explained it to me, so I really like this film. Okay, thank you so much. And what I wanted to know is that since this film, and now you said that Charan is not there and his wife is also not there. So what do you think they're planning to do it with these documents? So you have any idea?
So the documents, they are keeping it for now. I tried for some time to see if I can submit it to the National Archives, or if they would like to keep it, or if it can be included in some collection, or even tried to get in touch with the Partition Museum in Amritsar, because that it would greatly add to their narrative that they have in the exhibit. But these spaces are like hard to access. And I couldn't, the National Archives, they told me that they have some kind of annual sort of meeting in which you can send in some documents and then they decide whether they want to keep it in the collection or not. But I didn't find out about it. So then I eventually decided to do a book in which I will print all these documents, and then the book can become the archive which everybody can just like access.
That makes more sense than it getting lost in an archive where nobody will see it.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, so that's what is happening, but hopefully they'll retain, if not the originals, at least the book in some form.
Did you get any chance to meet anybody back in Pakistan who are victims of the partition?
No, I haven't yet traveled to Pakistan, but of course I have friends there who I speak to, and some of their families, like another filmmaker, Ammar Aziz. I mean, they have a partition history. But no, I haven't traveled there yet. But interestingly, what happened is that I was trying to find out who lived in this house, because like Amritsar was a Muslim majority district, and the demographic changed after the partition, and there were many houses, like Uncle explains, which were lying vacant, which then they occupied and all of that. So I was trying to find a paper trail to see who lived in this house before the partition, before him. And it didn't work out, because that would have also meant going to the custodian department in Amritsar. It was hard to locate for whatever reasons. I couldn't find it. It's also not as simple as you can go to a place and then they'll just turn some pages and you'll find out. So I'd been doing some research for this book, and I came across this writer who's based in Lahore, called Parvez Mahmood. Writer as in he contributes to a lot of like Pakistani dailies, and a lot of his writing is online. So he had written about some particular incidents in Amritsar that he remembered from, because his father had actually moved from Amritsar. And so I wrote to him, and we sort of got this conversation going, and I realized that he told me that his family had been Kashmiri immigrants who were living in Amritsar for about 150 years in the neighborhood. So it's likely that it was somebody from their family who lived over there. So that's like an ongoing conversation, but I haven't met him, so let's see.
It's not so easy for one to go back and then see the pain that one have gone through. So how was his experience while, he was expressing that what exactly had happened, and while he was showing all those documents, it must be filled with lots of memories at the same time, a pain which is filled in. What I observed in the film, it's basically speaking about, when the moment when he was recalling his friends, like 3 of friends he has recalled, it was seemed, a good memory. And the second thing, like, somebody was asking a question in the background saying that, how did you manage to escape? So he gave the background, but the intensity of the violence is something is not visible. So, I mean, did you come across that intensity of the violence one? And then the second thing, was he overwhelmed while going through with all the papers?
I think one thing I wanted to do with this film, and even since I was also looking at ideas of home, I wanted to displace the conversation about partition from the violence, because I think what has happened is that we've only spoken about the violence, and as a result, ended up not looking at the other aspects of it, and also that narrative of violence gets then co-opted in other ways. So I didn't want to just focus, make that the focus. And I realized that, it's not just pain that is the only sort of emotional escape when you speak about the partition. There is a lot of other very, very complicated feelings and emotions and memories tied to events and this sense of loss and leaving behind and also rebuilding. Like this sense of betrayal that he had, this question that which many people have, I'm sure, here and there, but were people complicit, but is this what they wanted? That kind of thing. And that just hangs in the air because we don't know how to answer that. And I think it's navigating those difficult emotions, which is not just pain. It's a lot of is difficult. And I suppose that is the reason why so many of them who had witnessed it do not talk about it or haven't spoken about it for so long. So he was, as for the documents, he was very proud of them. He was very proud of the fact that he had worked as a volunteer in the social service scheme in the refugee camps in Amritsar, because he was in his final year of college. And and he then joined college in Amritsar. So if you did that voluntary 3-month service, you were exempted from taking the English exams or whatever, any one subject exams. So there were all these schemes that they have, and there's detailed documentation of this in this book called Out of Ashes by M.S. Randhawa and a few other books. Like real, they really talk about the, small details of what was going on and how they were carrying out this, in the bureaucratic way, this process of rehabilitation. So he was always very proud of every little piece of paper that he had sort of kept, from counterfoils of post, whatever, to this whole business of the radio license. Like, I didn't know that you needed a broadcast receiver's license if you had a radio all the way up till the 80s or 70s. Yeah. So so he also had he didn't have the license, but he had to sell his radio because he didn't have the money to pay that license fee, which was 15 rupees, and he sold the radio to some halwai, and the radio gets stolen from that shop. So then the Postmaster General, who is supposed to be the person who renews this license, which is like a booklet, like a passport booklet, is writing him letters saying that if you don't pay this fees, then we are going to give some severe punishment. And then he's writing back and saying that, but I'm a refugee and I cannot afford this kind of thing. So yeah, I think it was a very complicated and, landscape.
Concerned about history, worked very hard and created it. Wonderful. Congratulations and thanks. My question is, as a future citizen of India, think of the future, not the past. The great grand wedding that took place in Ayodhya on 22nd January, the grand wedding between politics and religion on 22nd January in Ayodhya. What will be the future of India when the children born out of the grand wedding will rule India in the future?
What is happening now giving us some indication of what the future might be. And we would still hope that it is not that. We would still hope that that wedding actually comes apart.
And I think the film that we saw earlier, which was The Stained Dawn, where you actually have a system where there is a ongoing, very deep relationship between state and religion, how there is resistance there. So I think that is something we must not lose sight of. That moment, yes, it is this thing, but I think there is also a lot of resistance. There's also a lot of understanding that, it may not all be, the wedding may not be all what it seems. So let's hope that we can strengthen, these sensibilities and ways of resisting. And I think in a way this film also, it's important to remember, but it's also how you remember that makes all the difference. It's important not to discard the memories. She says something very beautiful, the daughter, She says, you must travel light, not carry so many memories, which is, in one way, it makes sense. But on the other hand, memories can also become something that people can use and misuse, right? So I think this way of also, and I like what you said, that you didn't want to focus on the pain and the trauma, that kind of very visceral, pain and trauma, and that there are different ways in which people negotiate, these kind of ruptures, and I think it's important for us to remember, to also learn from those, because those are also healing. Those are also healing, it gives, because it does kind of strengthen you in some way, so.